Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now we have some great news from the UNECE once again. Well, actually the GRVA, but it's kind of the same thing. And that means that we have another video to talk about autonomous driving. And yes, this time it is not about FSD supervised. It is actually about the unsupervised FSD. Because earlier this month, the UNECE released a blog post that the GRVA actually approved the draft for the ADS regulation. And the ADS stands for Automated Driving System. And that means that we're talking about level 3 plus here. The good thing about this regulation is that once it gets approved, which is very likely in June, because the UNECE, the WP29 meeting in June, is usually a formality once the GRVA has approved things, then it will actually become a reality immediately. Again, usually there's like a 6-month period between the approval and the actual implementation. Here, they actually mention specifically that it would go into effect immediately, which is awesome, right? Now, the key features that they are talking about in this regulation handles safety management systems, testing credibility, safety cases, in-service monitoring and reporting, and data storage systems for storing the data and storing the log files to see what has actually happened in case of an accident, for example. Now, this is great because this makes it a little different, or actually quite different, from the DCAS regulations, where the DCAS regulations, it talks about specific controls that need to be implemented. It talks about mathematical formulas. It talks about the lateral g-forces that are limited, whereas the ADS now just talks about common principles and what it should do and how it should behave, but not exactly how it should be enforced, that specific behavior. So that is really great, and it's a different way compared to what we are used to. Now, what is it exactly? It is a new proposal for a global technical regulation for automated driving systems. The ADS stands for Automated Driving System, and it is basically all the sensors, the LiDAR, the steering equipment, the computer that's included in that. That is all part of the ADS system. The DCAS is the Driver Control Assistance System, is what is FSD supervised. It is a level 2 system. ADS talks about level 3 plus. So yeah, that's the big difference. And I want to make that clear because as soon as this came out, this blog post, a lot of people on X were tweeting that this will help to get FSD supervised into Europe quicker, potentially, but it does not, because it's not related to that same regulation. So that is an important difference that we have to keep into our minds, that this talks about level 3 plus, so this is more towards robotaxi than FSD supervised. And down in that blog post, it was also talking about the GRVA will continue elaborating regulations on automated driving functionalities for level 2, 3, and 4. So I think that is where the misconception actually came from, that this was also concerning level 2, but it is the GRVA in general that is responsible for the level 2 systems, but also for level 3 and level 4. But they are in separated regulations. So yeah, maybe that was the misconception, I don't know. But in any case, what we're talking about today, this regulation, level 3 plus. Now, the common principle that we have in the regulation is also that automated vehicles should include driver engagement monitoring. Tesla already has that, other cars already have that. Some are in the dashboard. With Tesla, it's in the rear view mirror appliance, where the driver is continuously monitored for attention. Again, being monitored, level 3. With level 3, you still need to be able to take over in certain situations. Level 4, level 5 is basically no steering wheel anymore. Level 4 is it can do the driving in almost any circumstance. and it can or cannot have a steering wheel at that point. Another thing that they mention, and which is quite important, is that there needs to be, for example, an external HMI. So HMI stands for Human Machine Interface, on operational status of the vehicle. Some time ago, there was some mention in one of the regulations or in one of the drafts. They were talking about maybe needing like a blue light strip or some blue light that needs to be on the car to indicate that the car is in an autonomous mode. Because once you talk about level 3 plus, the car is responsible for the dynamic driving task and it's fully responsible. So that means that you don't have to pay attention anymore and you potentially could start doing other things in the car. And how do the police know that when you're on your cell phone that the car is actually in autonomous mode? So I think it's more in that direction that you're thinking, because regulations have to be adjusted when we're talking about level 3, level 4, and you can do all those things where there is not a single country in Europe, and I don't think a single country in the world where texting behind the wheel is legal anymore at this point. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Another common principle is that the consumer education and training programs to address the anticipated differences in the use and operation of automated vehicles. There is going to be a difference. You need to know what the car can and cannot do. You already need to know that for level 2, but there you are still deemed to be fully responsible. If that responsibility is taken away, you need to know even better when you are responsible. So that is an important factor that comes into play as well. You need to know what you're buying. You need to know what you're driving. And then there's another misconception that got in the world somehow, that people were saying that Tesla is screwed because you cannot use AI as a solution for autonomous driving anymore. And that is just not true. What the regulations actually say is that the car cannot learn by itself. So they want the system that Tesla is currently using and other manufacturers are currently using, whether they use AI or they don't use AI, it doesn't really matter. But the training for the car happens in one location, which is HQ usually. They can pull data from the car, but the car cannot learn individually. They can pull data from the car, they can put it into that system, train the system, make a firmware out of that system, download that firmware to the car so that all cars are behaving exactly the same. Otherwise, it would be nearly impossible to homologate a system where all cars are behaving differently, because you're homologating a certain behavior and all cars need to behave in exactly the same way. So that is something that the UNECE actually anticipated, and it is not an anti-Tesla thing. It is just that there is a misconception that AI cannot be used. It can be used, but the training needs to happen away from the car. As a general concept, the ADS should be at least the same, or the safety level should be the same or greater than a competent and careful human driver. Again, they're talking just about the principle. You need to have a car that drives as good as a good human driver does. And there's no specifics on what that actually means. There also needs to be evidence that the ADS and its features have undergone sufficient safety validation to ensure an absence of unreasonable risk. I will come back to the safety part and the testing part later in this video, but this also means that they acknowledge that there is always a risk. Zero risk does not exist, but it just means that it cannot take unreasonable risk. It is not allowed to cut off people. It is not allowed to make high G-force maneuvers unless it is to save somebody from an accident. For example, they leave those doors open in this case, which is great. Also, it requires the manufacturer to provide appropriate means to facilitate user understanding of functionality and operation of the ADS. You need to know what the car can do. Otherwise, how are you going to trust it? And how are you going to know in which situation you can actually use it? And there is also a general overview of non-driving related activities allowed when ADS is available or is active. Again, as I mentioned before, you can start texting behind the wheel, but if it's legally not allowed, then it's not going to be in the list of the non-driving related activities. Maybe you can nap, but not text behind the wheel. Maybe you can text, but not nap behind the wheel. Stuff like that will have to be listed somehow by the manufacturer saying, okay, our system allows you to do this and this and this. It's the manufacturer that allows it. And of course, those lists have to comply with local laws, obviously. What is also interesting is that within the regulatory framework, they mention the accident rate and the fact that they have statistically proven, or it has been statistically proven independently from any manufacturer, that autonomous vehicles are a lot safer than human drivers. In this case, they mention 18.5 accidents per million kilometers in manual driving or 7.1 accidents in automated driving, which is less than 50%. So you can reduce the accident rate by more than 50% if the cars are autonomous. Now, if all cars suddenly with this would become autonomous, that's a totally different story. Then there would be zero accidents or near zero accidents at all. But again, 7.1 accidents per million kilometers. I don't know many drivers that have done actually a million kilometers. A lot of them don't even have done a quarter of a million kilometers. So they basically never get into an accident or close to never get into an accident. Statistically, that is, of course. Some will get a lot more. That is definitely something that is interesting that they are taking that into account into the regulation, because it has nothing to do. It's more like, why are we doing this regulation? They want to have a reason behind it and a motivation behind the regulation, which I think is great that they actually mention this. Now, the requirements in general, it needs to anticipate risks, it needs to adapt its speed, and it needs to maintain appropriate distances. Again, this is what a good human driver is actually doing. So nothing out of the ordinary there that we can expect. Now I throw in this slide here to make a point about how the regulation is built. It's not about the content, but it's more like how they phrase things here. So it says, it shall avoid unreasonable disruption in the flow of traffic. It shall detect and respond to objects and events. It shall detect and respond to priority vehicles in accordance with the applicable law. Difficult word. The way that they word it is like, it needs to do that. How does it need to do that? It's not in the regulations. It just needs to do that. And I think one of the prime examples that we see recently, there have been some vehicles or videos from Tesla vehicles on FSD in the US, where it's driving in the lane and suddenly it goes into the emergency lane or driving on the hard shoulder. And you go like, what the hell is it doing? And you sometimes hear the driver even saying that, like, why is it doing this? Tesla, what are you doing? And then you see an ambulance passing by or a fire truck passing by. And as soon as that has passed, the car is moving back into the lane. This is similar to what Mercedes had in their level 3 system, where they specifically had a camera in the back window to monitor for emergency vehicles coming along. Tesla apparently can do that with the current hardware suite without intruding into the driver view around the vehicle, which is awesome. But then again, if you think about it, that's the US situation. In Europe, in about 9 or 10 countries already in Europe, it is legally mandated to create that virtual rescue lane. If you don't know what it is, go back to one of the previous videos where I explain it. I will link it up here where it is explained. And that already creates that corridor for an emergency vehicle to drive through. So it's less necessary, but still, when you are in a specific traffic situation, local roads, for example, and there is an ambulance wanting to come through, then you may want to part the seas to be able to allow the car to move through. What else do we have there? Shall comply with traffic rules, obviously. It shall interact safely with other road users. Of course, it's not going to kill anybody. And it shall avoid collisions with safety-relevant objects. That begs the question, what is a safety-relevant object? A person, a cyclist, another car? Yes. A wall? Maybe not. But then again, it's not supposed to be crashing at all. So it's avoiding collisions with everything in my book for that. And it needs to signal its operational status if required by applicable laws. So that's coming back to that, maybe that blue light that was once discussed, but I don't see it specified here. So again, the liberty is there for the manufacturer to actually create something that is going to indicate that the car is on autonomous mode. It also needs to be able to be directed by a road safety agent. And the road safety agent is, for me, a concept, a mixed concept. You have, of course, police officers, you have firemen that are cleaning up stuff, for example, but you also have road workers like you have in the US, the ones with those signs that they turn the slow or the go stop signs that are there. But also what we have here, I don't know if they have it in other countries as well, I suppose they do, is that we have teachers in the morning to help children cross safely across the street, and they are allowed to direct traffic as well. Well, basically just stop traffic and let it go again, but they are allowed to that as well. They are empowered by the police to direct traffic. Those are also, in my book, road safety agents. When ADS feature is active, the controls related to manual performance of the DDT, which is a dynamic driving task, shall be disabled, suppressed, or by other means made unavailable, that in a manner that prevents unsafe interference. When the car is on autonomous driving mode or automated driving mode, the dynamic driving task, the actual driving, is then conducted by the car, and the car is responsible for that. That means that you cannot tamper with that. Of course, you need to be able to take over in case of emergency situations, for example, or you need to be able to stop it somehow, maybe by just tapping the brakes. I don't know how they will fix that, but you should not be able to just mess with it so that the system would actually do something wrong. That is not allowed. Now, the thing that I mention here is that the direct view to the outside environment may be reduced or compromised. I think it's mostly geared towards like the, what was it called again? I think it was the robo-van that Tesla was presenting also next to the Cybercab, where there are no windows at all and the car can still do its own thing. So it's more for buses, cargo vehicles, stuff like that, that they want to have that on the roads as well. And they're just seeing with cameras, but there's no person that is actually seeing to the outside. What it technically could mean is that as soon as you turn on your autonomous mode, you go into level 4 driving, you know that you have this IQ glass or electrochromatic roofs on some of the cars. The car's front window could actually become a movie screen with, you could project movies on that, you could project some data on that, you can play games on it, because you're not seeing the outside anymore. I don't think that is what they mean here, but it leaves the door open for that kind of technology, and that would just be awesome. I don't think we're going to see that, but maybe our kids will one day be able to see that specifically and be able to use a car in that way. That would be freaking awesome. But yeah, I just found it very amusing that they are actually putting that specific sentence in the regulation as well. So it means that they are thinking about a lot of things that is future-proofing this regulation. So yeah, I think it's great that they put it in there. Now there's a difference between level 3, level 4, and level 5. So with level 3, it is in some driving tasks can be done. For example, like the level 3 that Mercedes has in Germany, is it can do it in sunny weather, it can do it with no tunnels, no police officers, stuff like that, no roadworks. That is level 3 driving. It is not specified that those are the confinements of the level 3 driving, but it does mean level 3 that the car cannot do anything or everything. With level 4, level 5, the car basically can do everything. In the regulation, they call it the ADS feature type 1, so the ADS-F1 or ADS-F2. And when we're talking about level 3 functionality, that's ADS-F1. That means the car needs to continually assess whether the fallback user is available to assume the role of the driver. In this case, the driver still needs to be in the driver's seat, buckled in, ready to take over, always paying attention. That is level 3 that we have here. As soon as the feature is turned on, the user needs to be informed some way that this is what is being expected. You need to be able to take over, and you will get like less than 10 seconds to take over. It's going to be longer than with a level 2 system. And maybe you can do specific things, and maybe you can have enough time to put your cell phone away at that point. I don't know how they are going to regulate that locally also, but it is what is being demanded, that you need to be able to take over, so you need to be in the driver's seat, and you need to be able to take over within a reasonable time, and you need to know what is being expected from you as the driver. When we're talking about user information, again, the manufacturer needs to facilitate user understanding of the functionality and operation of the system. You need to know what the car is capable of and what it is not capable of. That is the next part. ADS features and their capabilities and limitations. It needs to be clear in some videos, in the manual. The videos, maybe you need to go through some driver training before you can activate it, and you need to have watched all these videos so they can be sure, okay, I know what the car is doing and what it can do. And also, of course, the list of non-driving related activities that you will be legally allowed to do when driving in these conditions. As for manufacturers, they have heavy requirements in general on risk management, on supply chain management, on software and hardware development, on data acquisition and retention, which is basically GDPR, and cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is becoming more and more important in the world in general, but also for these kinds of cars. Because if a car's computer can do the full driving task, then the computer, if hacked, can be doing things that it should not be doing. If a hacker can get access to a fully autonomous car or a fully autonomous fleet, those cars can become weapons, in essence. Or maybe they just want to mess with it. That's less harmful, but it's still not great if there's somebody in the car at that point. And Tesla is on the right track for that. Recently there was, I think it was a Senate hearing where Lars from Tesla was also present, and they were talking about the cybersecurity part, and Lars said that they basically have never been hacked remotely, and they are participating, and I know that from several years ago as well, they are actively participating in hacker conferences. They put a car there, the first one that can hack the car is allowed to keep the car. So that is great. And in the early days, there was like a network connector behind the dashboard, so you could plug some device in, then you can get remote access. They have since removed that, and since then they've never been remotely hacked. Some other thing that has happened that I know of in the early days was that somebody was able, via that mechanism that I just explained, that the car could brake remotely, or could be triggered to brake remotely if the car was driving between 0 and I think it was 5 or 10 kilometers an hour. When the car was driving faster than that, the same command was putting the car into neutral and not slamming on the brakes. So Tesla already thought about that at that point, that when a car is driving on the highway and somebody would fire off that command, the car would not just slam on the brakes, it would just go into neutral. You would freak out probably, but you could recover from that. And it's not something that created a dangerous situation per se. So it's great that that is also included in the regulations. And more and more is becoming important because everything that is connected is a potential target for cyber criminals. I promised to get back to the testing part. Here we are with the testing part. There are 3 ways that they need to test. First of all, they need to test it in a virtual environment. For Tesla, this is great because they've just explained it last year also, that they have a complete testing environment that they can create things in. So they can create reality with high definition and then test their entire system in there. So that is covered definitely. You have track testing, which is basically what the RDW is doing for homologation. They go on a test track. You have a closed circuit, basically, where you can try all kinds of different situations. Compare it with the NCAP tests, the crash tests, where they can pull children in front, or cardboard children in front of the car, or cyclists when you're turning, somebody crosses the street at that point. That's a controlled environment with some variables in there in terms of weather, sunshine, being blinded by the sun in the cameras, stuff like that. And then you have the real world testing, where it is mandatory that situations that involve a large number of other road users, unlikely road infrastructure, a car blocking the path, an accident happening, roadworks, police agents that are, or police officers that are directing traffic, stuff like that in the real world. The test scenarios that they need to test for is also threefold. So you get the nominal scenarios, the basic driving, and that is knowledge and data based analysis that is creating those specific scenarios. We know how to drive straight on, we know how to take a corner, we know how to turn at an intersection, do a U-turn, stuff like that. Then you have the critical scenarios, which is something unexpected is happening. A child is running in front of a car suddenly. It is assumption based. You cannot, or it's very difficult to test that in the real world. So usually that's going to be more the track testing that is going to cover that. And then of course you have the failure scenarios, which is usually covered by the FMEA, which is a failure mode and effect analysis, which is part of the Lean Six Sigma methodology. And you kind of list all the things that can go wrong, and you list what the effects are and how to mitigate those effects. So you try to reduce the risk for each and every one of those. And those 3 different scenarios are what is actually going to happen with manufacturers together with the homologation company. And for Europe, that is the RDW. So that is also the reason why Tesla is going with the Netherlands, the RDW first, for the whole Article 39 exception, for which hopefully in the next couple of days or weeks, we will get a positive evaluation from. So that's the update that I have for you guys. And I think it's a very good one. The way that the UNECE is shifting the way that they are doing regulations, I think it's awesome. It opens up a lot of possibilities. And again, if this goes to the WP29 in June and it gets approved, straight after that, it is going to go into effect. But be aware that it is not because the regulation is there that Tesla is actually going to apply for that or implement that specific regulation. There are some local laws that might have to change for the whole thing about being able to text or sleep behind the steering wheel at that point. I'm sure Tesla can do that, but whether they will do that, that is a different question. So regulation one thing, Tesla rolling out is another thing. But yeah, let's hope that first of all, we get some good news in the coming days or weeks where we can already start testing FSD supervised, and maybe, just maybe, we can get supervised and unsupervised in the same year in Europe. And that would kind of put us ahead of the US for a change instead of running years behind. Make sure to subscribe and follow for the regulations and regulatory updates. And when FSD becomes available, I will definitely cover it as much as possible. My new car is coming in a few days to weeks now. The boat has arrived in Europe. They are unloading as we speak, so now it's waiting for a delivery date. And hopefully, since that's a hardware 4 car, soon I will also have the FSD on my car, the supervised version, and I will be testing the heck out of that. So if you're interested in that and following me along for that, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you can get notified for the next video and you don't miss any of it. In any case, thank you for watching now, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.